When my gut tells me something, I don't negotiate with it. I never have. 63 years on this earth have taught me that the quiet voice in your chest that tightens without warning. That voice is almost never wrong. And the morning my daughter called to tell me she was engaged, I smiled. I said all the right things. I told her I was happy, and I was, truly. But underneath all of that, something in me went still. I didn't say a word about it. Not yet. My daughter. I'll call her my girl because that's what she's always been to me. My girl. She met her fiancé at a conference in Toronto 2 years before the engagement. He worked in commercial real estate, polished, well spoken. The kind of man who knows exactly how much eye contact to make when he's trying to impress someone. I noticed that about him early on. Not suspicious exactly, just calculated. Like he'd read a manual on how to come across well and followed it to the letter. His name is not important for the story. What is important is his mother. She lived about 40 minutes outside of Ottawa, in a house that was bigger than it needed to be and decorated in a way that announced money without quite having enough of it. I noticed the little things. The chandelier that didn't quite fit the ceiling height, the new furniture arranged to hide older floors. I've spent 31 years running a small bookkeeping firm. I see numbers in everything, including the ones people try to hide. The first time I met her, she hugged me too quickly. That sounds like a strange thing to notice, but I mean it. The hug came before she'd even really looked at me. Like she'd already decided how the introduction was going to go and she was simply performing her part. She called me on within the first 10 minutes. She complimented my coat and then looked at my bag with that half-second inventory glance women sometimes give each other when they're trying to figure out exactly where you stand. I smiled and said nothing useful. My girl was glowing that day. That's the thing about being in love. It rearranges your face. She looked at her fiancé like he was the answer to a question she'd been carrying for years. And he was kind to her, I'll say that. Gentle. He never gave me a reason to point at him directly and say, there. That one. That's the problem. The problem was his mother. I built my firm from nothing. I want to be clear about that because it matters to understand what comes later. I started in my late 20s with a second-hand desk in a spare bedroom, doing tax returns for neighbors and small business owners who couldn't afford an accountant. I built it slowly, carefully, through referrals and reputation, through 31 years of showing up and doing the work. When I finally sold the firm 4 years ago to a junior partner I'd trusted with it for a decade, the sale was fair, clean, and substantial. Enough that I haven't needed to work since. Enough that my daughter will be cared for long after I'm gone. I did not advertise this. I never have. That is not the kind of woman I am. But somehow, and I have thought about this many, many times since, somehow his mother knew, or suspected, or had done some kind of arithmetic in her head about a woman who ran her own firm for 3 decades and arrived at a number that interested her. I noticed it the second time we had dinner together. She asked questions that weren't quite questions. You must be so relieved to finally be retired, she said, which sounds like nothing, but the word finally carries weight when you hear it from a woman who's watching you the way she was watching me. My girl deserves the best, she said later, looking at her son but speaking, I felt entirely to me. We all just want to make sure she's taken care of. A pause. Going into a marriage, it's good to have things settled. I turned the conversation to the salmon. 3 months before the wedding, my daughter came to stay with me for a long weekend. Just the two of us, the way we used to be before life filled up with other people. We sat on the back porch on the first evening, tea going cold between our hands, and she told me she was the happiest she'd ever been. I believed her. I also knew that happiness has a way of softening the edges of things we might otherwise see more clearly. I told her, that weekend, what I had never told anyone outside of my lawyer and my accountant. I told her the number, not because I'd planned to, but because she was about to make a legal commitment to another family, and I needed her to have the full picture before she did. I told her the number, and I watched her face move through surprise and then something that looked almost like sadness. Not for herself, but for me, for all those years of quiet work she hadn't fully understood. And then I said, I need you to promise me something. She looked at me. Don't tell his mother. Not now, not after the wedding, not over wine one night when things feel comfortable and easy and you think it doesn't matter anymore. Don't tell her. She started to say something. I could see it forming, the gentle protest, the mum, she's not like that. I know you believe that, I said. I'm not asking you to agree with me. I'm asking you to trust me. Just this once, trust the part of me that has been reading people for 60 years and is telling you to say nothing. She was quiet for a long time. Okay, she said finally. I promise. I didn't tell her everything I knew. Not yet. There are times when a warning is enough, and times when the full weight of what you know will only burden the person you're trying to protect. She was 3 months from her wedding. She was happy. I gave her what she needed and held back what would only have frightened her. The wedding was held on a Saturday in early September, outside the city at a property her fiancé's family had rented for the occasion. It was beautiful, I will say that. The kind of day that makes you believe, briefly, that everything is going to be fine. My daughter cried during the vows. Her husband wiped her cheek with his thumb and the whole room went soft. I watched his mother during the ceremony. She sat in the front row across the aisle, perfectly composed, in a pale gray suit that cost what my first month's rent had cost. She smiled at all the right moments, but her eyes, when they weren't on her son, moved. They moved around the room, taking inventory in the same quiet, practiced way she'd cataloged my coat and my bag on that first afternoon. I watched her watching, and I kept my expression pleasant and still. That night, after the dancing, after the cake, after my daughter and her new husband left for their hotel, I drove home and called my lawyer from the driveway before I even went inside. I told him to be ready. I did not know exactly when it would happen, but I knew something would. It came 31 hours after the wedding. I was at my kitchen table with coffee when my daughter called. She sounded confused more than frightened, which told me it had only just begun. Her mother-in-law had come to their apartment, the one the newlyweds had moved into just weeks before, with a man my daughter didn't recognize. The man had a bag. He was asking if this was a good time to go over some paperwork. What kind of paperwork? I asked, though I had a very strong sense already. She's saying it's just some family financial planning, a trust structure they set up. She says it's standard, that all new spouses do it, that it protects everyone. I set down my coffee. Do not sign anything, I said. Not one page, not your name, not your initials, not a date, nothing. Mom, ahem. Listen to me. Close the door if you need to. Go to another room, but do not put a pen to any piece of paper until I get there. She was quiet. Is he there? I asked. Your husband? He stepped out. He went to get coffee. He didn't know she was coming. I noted that. I noted all of it. I'm leaving right now, I said. 45 minutes. Don't let them rush you. If they push, if they tell you this has to happen today, right now, this hour, that is your answer about what this actually is. I called my lawyer from the car. He met me there. When I walked into that apartment, the man with the bag had his documents spread across my daughter's kitchen table. He introduced himself as a notary. His manner was professional, unhurried, the practiced ease of someone who does this regularly and expects it to go smoothly. My daughter was standing near the window with her arms crossed. Her mother-in-law was seated, a cup of tea in her hand, wearing the expression of someone who is trying very hard to look like she is doing you a favor. I sat down at the table. I looked at the documents. They were structured, and I say this as someone who has spent 31 years working with financial and legal documents. with a particular kind of cleverness. On the surface, they described a family trust arrangement. They used words like mutual protection and unified estate planning and joint legacy structure. If you read quickly, if you read the way people read when they're being made to feel that reading carefully is somehow rude or suspicious or indicative of a lack of trust, you would probably sign. What the documents actually did. Buried in the clauses on pages 4 and 7 and in the schedule at the back was transfer significant control over jointly held or inherited assets to a trustee. The trustee was a numbered company I didn't recognize. I would have bet, and I am a careful person who does not bet carelessly, that the numbered company traced back to his mother. My lawyer sat down beside me. I watched her face change, just slightly. The pleasant composure shifted, the way ice shifts when something underneath it moves. She had not expected a lawyer. She had expected, I think, a nervous young woman and a politely absent son and enough social pressure to get a signature before anyone thought too clearly. "We'll need some time to review these," my lawyer said pleasantly. "Of course," the notary said, equally pleasant, "though the timeline on the trust structure is." "We'll need some time," my lawyer said again, not louder, not harder, just again, with the particular patience of someone who does not need to raise their voice because they have already won. The mother-in-law set down her tea. "I don't understand why this requires a lawyer. It's a family matter. It's meant to protect everyone, including—" "Then you'll have no objection to giving us a few days," I said. First time I'd spoken since sitting down. I looked at her steadily. "If this is what you say it is, a few days won't change anything." She held my gaze for a moment, and in that moment I saw it, not guilt exactly, but recognition. The recognition that she had miscalculated, that the woman across the table from her was not what she had assumed. She left shortly after. The notary packed his bag. My lawyer stayed another hour, going through everything, making notes, explaining to my daughter in plain language what each clause would have meant had she signed. My daughter sat through all of it quietly. When my lawyer finally left, she sat across from me at her kitchen table, the same table where those documents had been spread an hour ago, and she looked at me with an expression I will not soon forget. "You knew," she said. "I suspected," I said. "There's a difference." "When did you know? Before the wedding?" "I knew enough," I said. "Enough to make a phone call. Enough to be ready." She was quiet for a long moment. Outside, the September light was going gold through the window. "How did she know?" she asked. "About the money. I didn't tell anyone. I kept my promise." "You did," I said. "You kept it perfectly." I had wondered this myself. I think, and this is only my read, based on what I know of how people like this operate, she didn't know a specific number. She knew a category. She knew that her son was marrying a woman whose mother had run a successful firm for 3 decades and who had recently retired. She knew that the apartment we'd helped with was paid for without visible strain. She had filled in her own blanks and decided it was worth the attempt. What she had not accounted for was that I had spent 31 years reading exactly this kind of document, and I had spent 63 years reading exactly this kind of person. The weeks after were difficult in ways I hadn't fully anticipated. My daughter had to sit across from her husband and tell him what his mother had done. That conversation happened without me. It should have, it was theirs to have, and I don't know everything that was said. What I know is that he was not who I had worried he might be. He was angry. Genuinely. He called his mother that same evening. I don't know what passed between them either, but the documents were withdrawn, no explanation offered, and his mother has not come back to that apartment since. Whether the marriage will hold the weight of all this, I honestly don't know. That is not mine to predict. My daughter is not naive. She wasn't before, and she certainly isn't now. She knows what she saw. She knows who showed up with a lawyer and who stepped out for coffee. She's a grown woman, and she will make her own choices about what those facts mean and what she can live with. What I know is this: she is protected. Whatever she decides, she is going into it with her eyes open, with her name on nothing she didn't choose, with assets that belong to her exactly as they were meant to. People have asked me over the years why I was always so careful about money, why I kept things separate, kept records, kept my own counsel. Some people think it's cold. Some people think it means you don't trust. I've heard all the versions of that criticism. But here's what 31 years of watching people's finances taught me: money doesn't change people, it reveals them. It removes the effort of pretending. And what's left is whatever was actually there. That woman didn't become greedy the moment she found out about a number. She was already exactly what she was. The number just gave her a reason to stop hiding it. The greatest thing I ever gave my daughter wasn't the money, it was the warning. Spoken quietly, on a September porch, 3 months before a wedding, over tea that had gone cold. The kind of thing that sounds like nothing at the time and means everything later. I don't tell this story to seem clever. I tell it because I know there are other women out there who have built something, slowly, quietly, over decades, and who are sitting across from someone at a dinner table feeling that same faint tightening in their chest. That voice that doesn't have words yet. Just wait. Trust it. You have earned the right to trust it. I still think about that kitchen table. The way those documents were fanned out across it, neat and deliberate, like they'd been placed that way 100 times before. Because I think they had. I think that woman had sat across from other families at other tables and watched the papers get signed without a single question asked. I think it had worked before. And I think she assumed it would work again. What she didn't account for was 31 years. Not 31 years of money. The money was never the point. 31 years of showing up when things were hard, of building something from nothing, of learning, slowly, sometimes painfully, how to read a situation before it reads you. That kind of knowledge doesn't come from a course or a book or a piece of advice someone gives you over coffee. It accumulates. It settles into you quietly, the way all real things do. And one day you realize you know things you can't fully explain, only act on. I've thought a lot about what drove that woman to arrive at a newlywed's apartment 31 hours after a wedding with a notary and a bag full of papers. And I don't think it was desperation. I think it was habit, a habit of taking from people who hadn't learned yet how to hold on to what was theirs. There is a kind of person who moves through the world that way. Not through hard work or genuine relationship, but through the willingness to press at the right moment, to count on politeness and confusion and the social discomfort of saying no to someone who is smiling at you. She had made a calculation. She had decided my daughter was that kind of opportunity. She was wrong. Not because my daughter is weak. She isn't, not even close. But because the people who love us, when they do their work right, leave us with more than money. They leave us with the ability to recognize danger before it fully arrives. My daughter knew something was wrong before she could name it. That's not luck. That's everything I tried to give her, quietly, over decades. What I know about how life settles its accounts has nothing to do with punishment or fate in any spiritual sense. It's simpler than that. Choices compound. The woman who arrived with those papers had spent years sharpening a particular kind of cunning while letting everything else go soft. Her honesty, her sense of what was actually hers to take, her willingness to build rather than extract. And in the end, that's what she had: cunning alone, which is not enough when the person sitting across from you has spent 31 years building the real thing. I am not a perfect person. I have made my share of mistakes in business, in relationships, in the years before I learned to trust my own instincts. But I kept trying to be better than I was the year before. I kept choosing to do the work honestly, to stay clear about what belonged to me and what didn't, to build my daughter's future on something solid rather than something borrowed or taken. That commitment, to act rightly even when no one is watching, to keep thinking carefully even when it's exhausting, to get back up and keep going even when the path is longer than you expected. I believe that's what protects you in the end. Not because the universe rewards virtue on a timetable, but because those choices make you into someone who is very difficult to fool. My daughter called me the week after everything settled. She didn't say much. She just said, "I'm glad you told me." So am I.